Hello, welcome to Picture Me Coding with Eric Gaker and Mike Mall. Mike, this is our final episode of Picture Me Coding for 2024. So we're going to take a few breaks after this, but we will be back next year. I think you and I got better at this podcasting thing this year. Mike, what do you think?
I think that's fair to say, although I suspect a certain amount of that was that you got much better at editing.
So we stayed the same, but the editing increased. I like to think that we'll continue to improve in the new year. You and I have been in the past, we've been nervous to talk about stuff that we're not experts in. So my hope is when I look back on what we said this year, my hope is we didn't say anything wildly inaccurate. We've done our homework pretty well. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, we've definitely done a lot of homework. I suspect I probably have said a few wildly inaccurate things, but I usually hedge my bets a little bit. So
I think I'd like to bring in more guests next year. That's one of my goals, bring in more guests. But we are eager to hear from you too, listeners. You should send us an email at podcast@picturemecoding.com. Let us know which of our episodes was your favorite. Did you hear any episodes where we just totally sucked? What did we do well? We'd like to hear from you. We'd like to use your feedback and become better podcast hosts 9000s in the year 2025. Host 9000 is, that's what we refer to ourselves as now.
Yeah, and if you're in middle school, we'd like to hear why you don't think we're funny.
Mike heard recently that middle schoolers do not find us funny. I read recently that people find it extremely annoying when they listen to podcasts and the hosts are laughing at their own jokes all the time, inside jokes. So that's apparently a podcasting faux pas, Mike.
I'd also like to learn the correct use of the word skibbity. So
I will pass on that one. So here's a stat absolutely astounding to me. We reached more than 1,500 listeners in 32 countries this year. I was just shocked to see this.
The 32 countries thing really surprised me. That's actually more countries than I've been to. So.
Yeah, significantly more than I've been to too. Thank you so much, podcast friends, for listening to us. It's extremely gratifying to have people spending time with us. I don't think it's not like we're trying to reach the largest soapbox possible. And I guess sidebar, if we were a music podcast about software, would not be a great foundation to build our largest soapbox on top of.
I think we should aspire, though, to have the entire audience of music/software enthusiasts.
Okay.
I really think
I struggle to identify how big that audience is.
I do too, but I think it's bigger than the audience we currently have.
Okay, so we have room to grow. But here's the thing. It's really gratifying that people are listening to us. For me, because it affirms my belief that the stuff we're talking about, it actually is interesting. We've got some pretty dense, nerdy, sometimes oddball topics. And to discover all you people out there also interested in these things and learning along with us is really gratifying. So thank you so much, listeners. We're so happy you've been with us so far, and we hope to see you again in 2025.
Absolutely. Keeps us motivated.
Now, Mike, you made a playlist. We have talked about a lot of music over the last year. You made a playlist. Is that right?
A good friend of ours had said, it would really be nice if you had like a list of all the musical artists that you've been recommending so that I could just look back through them. And I thought, that's a good idea. But what I've done so far is for 2024, I made a Spotify playlist that has one or two tracks from every album that was recommended by one of us or one of our guests. So it's just called Picture Me Coding 2024 on Spotify. And I think it includes every band that we recommended in 2024.
Wow, that's quite a lot of effort. Thanks for doing that. We will put a link to that there. Did you have a standout favorite for the year, Mike? What was the thing you liked listening to most, would you say?
Pretty easy for me this year. Katie Crutchfield is sort of my Taylor Swift. She's my Beyonce. and my
From
Tom York
Waxahachie.
and my Tom York. Yeah, she's the motivating force behind Waxahachie, and she had the album Tiger's Blood out this year, which was my favorite, both in terms of my subjective evaluation and also Spotify Wrapped tells me that 4 of my top 5 tracks were from that album. So I guess I wasn't imagining that.
I don't buy Spotify Wrapped. I think it's fake news. My favorite album, the one I returned to over and over again, was the Good Looks record. I loved that record.
Also very good. I think that might have finished just outside my top 3, but very good record.
Were you going to respond to my fake news comment on Spotify Wrapped?
I have some skepticism about the Wrapped thing as well. I think it was considerably more accurate this year than it has been the last couple of years, though. I think one thing that happens that I've seen happen is that I'm not quite sure how it counts. So, like in past years, I've seen that a track from an album will turn out to be my top track for the year, but it's just the first track on the album. And it's not necessarily my favorite. I know it's not the one that I went back to. It just happens to be the first track on the album. So I think they did a little better job this year, but I'm a little skeptical of how they count listens.
Seems like every company is getting in on the Spotify Wrapped copycat game. Banking, credit card websites. See your year in review. I went to Sentry the other day. Sentry does error reporting for web applications. Sentry has a year in review, and I clicked through a few slides, and I was kind of got bored. I was like, I don't really want to know how I use Sentry in 2024. Anyway, Mike, for our final episode of the year, I wanted to look at some of the recent news stories. It may be a little cheap to do a news roundup. It doesn't take quite as much of homework for us, but there are some loony news stories that I've read the last couple weeks. I'm reading these stories and I just keep getting this feeling like, am I on drugs too? It's like Jefferson airplanes, white rabbits playing in the background as I read every single one of these pieces that we're talking about today. And we have a lot to talk about, so I think we should get to it.
Yeah, it's there are a lot of news stories that make me wonder about maybe there's a glitch in the matrix. We live in Southern California, and there are a large number of Teslas here. If you haven't been to Southern California or San Francisco and south, you may not have the same experience. But where I live, Teslas are probably the most common car. So probably 3 or 4 times a day, I see a Tesla Cybertruck, and every time I see one, I just have this same reaction, which is the renderer is broken, and the simulation that we're living in has some problem with the renderer, and it's just not able to quite render this vehicle for some reason. Anyway, yeah, weird stories.
That's a good lead in for the first thing I wanted to ask you, Mike. So I want to talk about a news story that really hit me like a lightning bolt. But before we do, I want to give you a probability problem, if you're up for it.
That's my favorite thing on a Saturday morning.
Okay. So this problem has a name. It is the 2 envelopes problem. And here's the setup. There are 2 sealed envelopes, and one envelope has twice the money as the other envelope. So 2 sealed envelopes have got some unknown quantities of cash in them, and one envelope has twice as much as the other one. We'll call them envelopes A and envelope B. Now, a guy in a suit comes to your house, puts one of these envelopes in your hand and puts another one on the table and says, here you go, Mike. You can switch to the other one if you want to. Do you want to switch? So you're holding envelope A. Do you say, no, I'll take envelope B instead?
And I don't know what's in envelope A.
You don't know. Actually, there's a variation of the problem where you can actually look and see what's in envelope A.
So this sounds vaguely similar to the Monty Hall problem.
It does, yeah.
So
Monty Hall problem, yeah.
At that basis, I'm going to switch.
Okay. Sounds like the Monty Hall problem. Sounds like you are tricking me with probability. I'm switching.
Yeah, deeply analytical solution here.
Yeah, the Monty Hall problem, I find it also puzzling, but it's almost like easier to puzzle out. This one's harder. If we just try to calculate the probability that we will get greater value from switching, there's a 50-50 probability that the one you're holding has half of the other one, and the probability that the other one has twice what you have. But there's also a probability that the other envelope has half of what you have. So if you just look at from envelope A to B, I'm holding A, I'm looking at B, there's a 50% probability that envelope has half of what I have in my hand. And there's a 50% probability that it has twice what I have in my hand. So it's like 1/2 times x over 2 and 1/2 times 2x. Now, if you add all that up, calculating the value in switching, the actual answer is, well, you get 5/4 times whatever the value is. So that sounds like, wow, I should switch. I should definitely switch from A to B.
So I was right.
Yeah, you were right. But now you got a new problem. You switch to B, you're looking at A now, and A suddenly looking pretty sexy over there. The new problem is I switched to B. Well, isn't the probability that A is better than B also 5/4 times x? So this is actually a paradox, and I don't know the answer. And I don't know, from what I've read, I don't know that people are really agreed upon the answer. It's a paradox. You switched from A to B, and then you look back at A and like, wait a minute. The calculation I ran to switch to B is the same calculation I would run that would tell me to switch to A. I'm going to keep switching forever. So that's my decision. Just keep switching.
I think the optimal solution, given the times that we live in, is you club the guy in the head and you take both envelopes.
You don't say, let's just freeze this beautiful moment in time forever and just endlessly loop switching A and B. That's not the optimal solution.
Could be, yeah.
This problem comes from the field of decision theory. Decision theory has been around for a while. And I actually thought of decision theory as I was reading this crazy story this week from the New York Times about CEOs dropping acid. So I'm going to give you, the story is called "The CEOs Are Tripping. Can Psychedelics Help the C-Suite?" It comes from the New York Times. Here's the beginning of the article. In the early 1960s in Silicon Valley, a technology executive named Myron Stolaroff created a psychedelic research center in Menlo Park, California, which he and his colleagues gave a deceptively generic name, the International Foundation for Advanced Study. Eager to know whether tripping could help solve creative problems, the center brought in dozens of engineers and executives for guided drug trips. A researcher who helped run the trials told me that this operation carried out in a nondescript office was in no way considered illicit. Quote, "Sometimes it was the bosses who came in," Mr. Fadiman said. "This wasn't sneaking off into the mountains with the rainbow people."
They make that sound like a bad thing.
Mike, have you known anybody who's done LSD at work?
At work, not to my knowledge.
Oh, okay.
If you take out the at work part, then yes.
Okay. So you got some. So the article goes on, talks about social stigma associated with taking LSD, how it's criminalized, how interest faded away, right? It was no longer just this experimental, it's okay to do thing. But the article continues, and this is, I'm going to quote again, but business leaders never completely lost interest in the substances. Some continued using them for pleasure. Others attested to their life-changing influence. Steve Jobs declared taking LSD a critical life event, one that, quote, shows you there's another side to the coin. Sam Altman, sidebar here, leader of OpenAI. Sam Altman said psychedelic trips could be, quote, totally incredible. And Elon Musk has posted on X about having a prescription for ketamine, a drug that can have hallucinogenic effects. Psychedelic drugs are broadly more popular too. Researchers at the RAND Corporation estimated that 8 million adults in the U.S. used psilocybin in 2023. Is this surprising to you to hear?
The numbers are a little surprising. There's been this kind of weird microdosing thing that people talk about in the Silicon Valley culture for many years now. And I have a couple of friends who I will obviously not name who are adherents of psilocybin. So and they're not people who you would, pick out on the street as being hippies or anything. They're very conventional looking people. So I guess it's not the sheer numbers surprise me, but the fact that it's fairly pervasive is not too surprising, I guess.
I was just surprised by this. The article is mostly focused on this fellow named Murray Rogers from Canada. This person, 69 years old, used to be an oil and gas executive, and the story describes how he had these bad experiences. That it was a divorce. He had a failed IPO for his company, and then he sort of decides, well, I guess I'll become a yoga teacher, and then I'll go take ayahuasca in the jungle in Central America. So that's what this guy did, right? And the article says there's now a growing cottage industry of psychedelic retreats for business leaders. So this is where it gets surprising to me. They get charged about $4,000 each to come to this place that he has in the Canadian Rockies. And the article says among business leaders, the stigma of using these drugs is fading. A long-term loosening of corporate culture, as well as the premium that American businesses now put on imagination and emotional openness, may have primed business leaders for psychedelic experimentation. Look what we pushed them to do, Mike. We said, you need to be so creative. You need to think out of the box. We've driven these people to drug use.
It's tragic. Too many envelope problems for them to solve.
Too many envelope problems. That's what I think. Yeah. In a world powered by ego, the article says, some business people suggest the growing popularity of ego-checking drugs could have worrisome professional fallout. That concern was summed up in a recent viral post on X from the chief executive of an AI company who wrote, quote, of the Silicon Valley founders I know who went on some psychedelic self-discovery trips, almost 100% quit their jobs as CEO. That's pretty out of the box, right? I need to think out of the box. Once I get far enough out of the box, I realize, well, that box kind of sucks. I don't even want to be CEO anymore.
Maybe we should require CEOs to take ayahuasca.
There's a quote in the piece that really got me thinking. The person who runs this, he said the key word is surrender. It doesn't matter how much you've read, how much you think you know about this experience, none of it will be true. And I was reading recently about a philosophy professor from Yale named L.A. Paul. L.A. Paul wrote a book called Transformative Experience. So in professional philosophy, there is a current of research and thought that has really pursued this decision theory stuff. Now, in economics, they use it to try to predict, I think, I'm not an expert, but I think they try to use it to predict how and why people make decisions, economic decisions. In philosophy, the pursuit is a little more like, how can we be assured that we're making rational decisions, the most rational decisions? If you look at something like effective altruism, this is like an offshoot of that. Can you pursue rationality to like an extreme degree? Anyway, this book, Transformative Experience, by the philosophy professor L.A. Paul, talks about how some experiences are transformative because of there are two qualities that make them completely radically changing or altering of the person who undertakes a decision. One is there's an epistemic quality to them. In philosophy, epistemology is like, I don't know how to assess what I know. I can't tell you what I don't know. I can't tell you if it's true. So these experiences may be as epistemic. You cannot know what it's like to have this experience before you have it. The example L.A. Paul gives is having a baby. You could read a lot about having a baby, but you'll never really understand the experience until you have it. Paul gives another example of becoming a vampire. Like, you wouldn't know. You could read a lot about becoming a vampire, but you cannot know what it's really like before you do it.
I'm guessing he's taken acid too, then, if he...
She actually, Lori Paul, but she publishes under L.A. Paul.
Not related to Logan Paul, right?
No, I don't think so, no. So epistemic quality these experiences have that make them transformative. You cannot know what they're like before you have them, and they're personally altering. Afterward, you become a different person. And why is that interesting? Well, to undertake a decision, you have preferences that go into that decision. And if you make a decision that alters your preferences, you will be a different person after you have this experience. And so why is this interesting? The argument that L.A. Paul makes is a little bit shaky of this decision theory stuff. It's like you can't rationally make certain decisions. They're either like aside from rationality or irrational. You can't rationally make decisions where you will be someone else afterwards and you do not have the capacity to understand what it means to have that experience. So these are transformative experiences. Certain decisions ultimately you may not be able to make a rational decision about. Now, I got to say, this always really appealed to me because I get a little annoyed with, like, yes, we humans are rational beings, and all the decisions I undertake, I go to the grocery store and I pick something off the shelf, like, these are all rational decisions. I just kind of like, nah.
Yeah, it seems that way with like having kids, especially at least in the modern era. I mean, there was probably a time where having kids was a rational decision because it was a labor source. But in the world that we live in, it's really hard to rationally make the decision to have children because you really like you suggested, you just have no idea what it's going to be like, and you can't explain it to people. There's just no amount of knowledge you can pass on to other people to let them know what it's going to be like.
And you will be different after that decision has come to pass. Now, you might be looking at me like, well, how in the world does this relate to the CEO's dropping acid? I think it's because this line from the guy who runs the center, he's like, it doesn't matter how much you've read. None of it's true. You will be somebody different afterwards. You might quit your job as CEO. And I think what this says is that being a company leader is it's like you're making decisions all day long. It's mentally taxing. And so like forfeiting your rationality, forfeiting your decision making is a release valve. Here's some notes from people who came to the session. So the entrepreneurs begin, this is from the piece, to ready their quote sacred spaces, the mattresses where they spend the next 4 hours. So they build these like little nests. Next to each mat, Mr. Rogers placed a bucket with a water bottle and toilet paper in case of tears. He then retreated to a bar at the back of the room where he began to weigh mushrooms on a scale. Can I take notes? Adam, one of the entrepreneurs, asked. That part I like. Can I take
Yeah.
notes?
My guess is that you could try, but
One last line from this. So after this event is over, the writer goes back to talk to Adam. Adam's a pseudonym, but that's not the real name of this CEO. Adam described how during his trip, he found himself on a spaceship where some of his fellow travelers were farmers, not astronauts. He thought to himself, farmers don't belong in outer space. Afterward, Adam tried to relate his vision to his business, and he realized that high flying, fast moving startup environments don't suit every kind of worker. He considered which of his employees should be discouraged from staying on his team for the long term. So here's the ultimate takeaway: you are an executive at a company, you go on this vision quest, and it helps you figure out who you should fire.
Yeah, I'm a little skeptical of that outcome. I don't know, but I don't doubt that some people are having transformative experiences doing this, but I also feel like there's a little bit of it which is part of like a sort of a status thing, like taking ayahuasca is kind of like saying, oh, I was invited to Davos.
Mm.
It's this thing that not everybody does and that kind of singles you out and makes you sound more interesting than you probably are.
There was a co-op at Berkeley. Co-op is a student-run housing setup, and its name was Lothlorien. It's still around. Lothlorien, of course, is a J.R. Tolkien reference. And Lothlorien famously used to have this event every year called the Food Orgy. And I'm just going to let you fill in your imagination what you think that might be about. But if you had said to someone, whether or not you went, that you had been invited to the Food Orgy, they would say to you, oh, wow, really? There's a certain cachet to getting invited. Anyway, here's why I wanted to start with this crazy story about the executives taking mushrooms and ayahuasca and LSD. I actually read this article and my response was like mind blowing, like, oh, this explains so much, so many poor decisions. For instance, Mike, if you're a leader of a company, you take a bunch of drugs, you might go, wow, we should hire a whole lot of expensive professional developers and have them sit in meetings all the time. And I don't even know what I want them to build. I just want to get on my spaceship with them. It makes so much more sense if you got a company where the leadership is on drugs, doesn't it? Am I out in space here on this one?
Um, well, I can probably think of reasons for that particular scenario that did not involve hallucinogenics, but there do seem to be a lot of weird things that come out of Silicon Valley in particular that do seem like they must have started with a bit of a drug trip.
Yeah, I mean virtual reality, right? Or Apple Maps. Remember Apple Maps when they launched? I mean, that's a total drugged out situation, right? That was like they had a melting Brooklyn Bridge and streets were in water and roads floating in the air and stuff. I mean, come on, you got to be on drugs, right? This is when they launched it 10 years ago.
Yeah, and
Tim Cook, he had to issue a public apology for Apple Maps.
there was that company that made like the internet connected juicer or something like that.
Juicero. Yeah, Juicero. Well, one of the other articles I want to talk to you about today was about WordPress, but I think we wanted and this is another one where I'm like, wow, you got to be on drugs. That's got to be why this stuff is happening. But there were a few others. What should we do next? We got WordPress. We got some Google announcements.
Let's talk about Willow.
Oh, okay. All right. Do you want to set it up for me?
So there was a news story that was pretty widely propagated, I think just this last week, maybe early the week before, about a new quantum computing breakthrough at Google. They more or less have suggested that they have a solution to the error correction problem. And it's fairly technical, but I think roughly the claim is that they can get arbitrarily good error correction just by adding more physical qubits to some sort of logical qubit setup. And it's been hailed as sort of like an important milestone in quantum computing. You know, naturally, the talk out of Google is pretty hyped and breathless, and there's been a lot of pushback from various other parties that are not part of Google. But it does seem like it's a real thing. It doesn't mean that we're going to be factoring large prime numbers next week or anything like that, but it does sound like it's a step forward.
Yeah, so this is another article I read this week where I was like, whoa, there's Jefferson Airplane, White Rabbit's playing in the background again. One pill makes you taller and one pill makes you small. Oh, which one is it, Mike? So the thing about reading this coverage of this is I am nowhere near knowledgeable enough to really competently talk about quantum computing. I just want to say that right off the bat. But the few things I know are it's physically very difficult to make a quantum computer that can run these processes. And the computations that are viable to run on them are specialized computations. It's not like we're running websites in the future on quantum computers, right? It's not like I'm going to go to my bank and withdraw $10 and there'll be a quantum computer in the ATM, right? And so when people were talking about the stories about it, they were sort of losing that sometimes. I'm not talking about experts. Experts obviously know that. But let me just give you a quote from an article that I read. I think this was from The Verge. Google's quantum computing lab just achieved a major milestone. On Monday, the company revealed that its new quantum computing chip Willow is capable of performing a computing challenge in less than 5 minutes, a process Google says would take one of the world's fastest supercomputers 10 septillion years or longer than the age of the universe. And that's a pretty like, whoa headline, we did this in 5 minutes. It would take your computer 10 septillion years. But lost in the noise there is, what is this? It's like this extremely specialized quantum computing computation. Am I wrong?
Yeah, I mean, and are they even taking into account the fact that I'm overclocking my CPU, so.
It might take me a shade less than 10 septillion years,
Yeah,
Google.
I mean, I could probably do this in 10 to the 24th years, So I think there's two things you read in popular accounts of quantum computing that are misleading at best. And one of them is that if we crack quantum computing, it's just going to mean a much, much faster computers, which is sort of generally wrong. I mean, it means that there are going to be certain algorithms that we could do that were previously intractable, but it doesn't mean that, we just have this brand new supercomputer, which is orders of magnitude faster than our old
Yeah,
computers.
that was the observation that I thought was lacking from some of the like breathless coverage of this. And maybe the news, maybe tech news is no, it doesn't have to be on the hook for. They should be pointing that out. Yeah, they shouldn't be just glossing over that. I was going to give them a little bit of slack, but they don't get any slack in this area.
Because of the fact that this field is so impenetrable, I generally rely on other people's opinions about what's actually going on. And of course, the first person I always refer to is Scott Aronson.
Yeah, yeah.
And then I also like look for people popularizers like Sabina Hassenfelder. She's a physicist and she likes to explain complicated things like this. And Scott Aronson's take I thought was pretty interesting. He wrote an article about it on his blog because people sort of prompted him to do so.
Because they're asking him, yeah, you said that to me. And I had my kind of visceral reaction of, wait a minute, are you overhyping this success? It's obviously not just a thing that's viable, right? It's extremely niche research application at this point. And Scott Aronson says, yes, this is great. It's a real milestone for the field. So don't dismiss it based on the fact that it's very small computation ability and they're not just exaggerating what they've done here, although they may have exaggerated in the past. But there's this other line that came out of the Google announcement for this that people seized on, and it turned it again into like, well, this is like an LSD fantasy. This is we're not talking about science, right? And the line was, this mind-boggling number, the 10 septillion, exceeds known timescales in physics and vastly exceeds the age of the universe. It lends credence to the notion that quantum computation occurs in many parallel universes, in line with the idea that we live in a multiverse, a prediction first made by David Deutsch. So they're saying, hey, we built this cool quantum computer. We solved this error correction problem a little bit, and we were able to run this computation. Oh, by the way, there are a lot of parallel universes. So obviously the computation had to be run in all the other universes because ours isn't old enough to like to run this. And so people are talking about Google and the multiverse and stuff like that. And I was like, what? I mean, I don't understand this stuff, so I can't just wave it away. I went looking for some physicists. There was a group of physicists on Reddit talking about this. And one of them said, yeah, that's not a falsifiable claim. Which sounded to me like a dry physicist's way of saying, okay, next.
Yeah, that's I don't know, it's like, here's an extremely complicated result that you probably can't understand, and to explain it, I'm going to tell you another extremely complicated thing that nobody understands and is unfalsifiable. But
it sounds very sci-fi.
I liked Sabina Hassenfelder's take too, which was she said something along the lines of, we need about 1 million qubits to do practical computation, and after this milestone from Google, we still need about 1 million more qubits to do practical computations. So it's I will take Scott Aronson's word that it is a real milestone, that it is a step forward, but also it sounds like from both of them that this still leaves us a long way from doing real useful computations with quantum computers.
Well, let's give Scott Aronson the final word here. From his post, he says, I liked this. I guess 20 years of covering hyped, dishonestly presented non-milestones in quantum computing has inclined me to be pretty positive when a group puts in this much work, demonstrates a real milestone, and talks about it without obvious falsehoods. I like that as a summation because it's like, okay, real milestone. Good job not giving us a whole lot of bullshit when you told us about it. We'll overlook the multiverse thing.
It's sort of a masterwork in damning with faint
really
praise,
is.
I think.
That's exactly what it is. That's why I loved it so much. It's like, wow, they did a great job not feeding me a whole lot of crap with this announcement. And what that makes me, it makes me a little bit wary about future announcements. So I'll probably go back to him in the future. But here's another story in the "Are they on drugs" category. Yet every single story from this week is in that category, believe it or not. If you've been following the drama about WordPress, Mike, have you been following the WordPress drama? I know you're not a big WordPress news person.
I have not really been following it. No, I am aware that WordPress exists. I know that a company at which we worked together used WordPress for their main website, and that's about the extent of my familiarity
I
with
like
it.
that you say I know WordPress exists. Do you know how much of the internet is projected to run on top of WordPress websites?
I don't know the numbers, but I know that it's significant. I remember recently seeing something about the number of websites that still run PHP, and I was sort of shocked at the percentages.
It's
But
somewhere
yeah,
between 20 and 40% of the internet is on WordPress, maybe 40%.
that's the second most alarming statistics I've heard this week. I I heard a thing on another podcast this week where they said that something like 6% of U.S. GDP is charged on airline mileage credit cards,
What?
uh, which was uh, really made me. I did not fact check that. It sounds outlandish to me, but in any case, back to
Okay,
WordPress.
so WordPress. Some quick facts about WordPress. Maybe we'll do a whole show about WordPress someday. Where did it come from? Why is it so popular? Stuff like that. But anyway, here's just some quick facts. It's a content management system. You can easily write blog posts with it. It's written in PHP. It's very easy to publish articles. It started as a blogging platform, but then it was so easy to get websites spun up. This is in the early days, pre-Web 2.0. We're talking like early 2000s. So easy to spin up a website and just load it up with content that people started using it for e-commerce. And so it became hugely popular. It's still massively popular, more than 40% of websites on the internet by some projections. It is an open source project, but there's a lot of companies associated with it because there's a lot of money in providing services, in providing themes, in providing plugins that can extend the functionality of it. It's a PHP site that usually talks to MySQL or a database. One common WordPress developer technique, you load it up with plugins. A lot of these are paid plugins. You might pay for themes. Now, there is a company called WP Engine, and they're a really popular host. So you go to WP Engine, you give them a credit card, you click some buttons, boom, you got a WordPress site on the internet. You tell them, here's the domain I want. Boom, they registered for you. They set up DNS. Everything's done. Boom, you got your site. You start clicking your junk, you got your theme, and immediately you can start putting content on it. You could host WordPress yourself, definitely. It is PHP with a database. That's pretty much it. But because you could just click around on these sites, WP Engine to get a WordPress site up very quickly, very, very popular. They also do themes. They also do plugins. They do some of the most popular ones. Anyway, here's an article out this week about some ongoing controversy in this whole ecosystem. So I'm going to read to you a little bit of this article. A California district court judge on Tuesday ruled that Automatic and its CEO, Matt Mullenweg, must restore WP Engine's access to WordPress.org, a theme and plugin repository owned by Mullenweg. Now, sidebar, I probably should have given you this background first. Mullenweg is the person who originally started WordPress. Automatic is his company. They also offer WordPress hosting. So they're rivals, really, with WP Engine. But Mullenweg is the original author of WordPress, and it is an open source project. And so his company dedicates a lot of resources to continuing to hack on WordPress. It runs so much of the internet, it requires a lot of hacking. It's very commonly attacked. So anyway, moving on in the article. Judge Araceli Martinez Olguin noted that WP Engine's access to WordPress.org themes, plugins, and subdomains should be restored as they were on September 20th, when Mullenweg launched a high-profile war against WP Engine, calling it, quote, a cancer to WordPress at an event. He soon afterwards banned WP Engine from accessing WordPress.org. The ban resulted in WP Engine not being able to access and update its popular Advanced Custom Field plugin, which Automatic took control of, forked it, and named Secure Custom Fields. The ruling orders Automatic to restore WP Engine's access and control of Advanced Custom Field plugin on WordPress.org. This is a little bit messy here. We've got Mullenweg, the guy who runs Automatic. And Automatic is involved in WordPress, seemingly an open source project. And you've got this company, WP Engine, and they're doing paid stuff around WordPress. Okay. So those are the players so far. But then we've got WordPress.org. What is that .org? What would you think of? You hear WordPress.org. What does that make you think, Mike?
Nonprofit.
Seems like it, right? I mean, in this scenario, what would you think the role of WordPress.org would be?
I don't know, possibly, documentation or promoting a community edition of the software or something.
Yeah, open source, community, like governance, stuff like that. Well, here's where it gets a little muddy. So Automatic, Mullenweg's company, they also run WordPress.com. And that's a business that competes with WP Engine. They do hosting as well. WordPress.org, I think people just sort of subtly assumed, okay, like that's where you can go and download the open source version of WordPress. So it's part of like the open source community. But there was an interview recently after this controversy exploded where Mullenweg said, no. WordPress.org, that belongs to me personally. People were like, huh? So Mullenweg's really mad at WP Engine. They run more than 20,000 websites. And if you want to get into the reasoning, like where did this controversy come from? He said at first that they are not giving back to the open source project, but it really just like it reads like sour grapes that they're so successful. So here's what he's done. He called them a cancer to their ecosystem. He blocked them from WordPress.org servers, so you can't install their themes or plugins or updates or whatever. He told people at a conference, you got to vote with your wallet and stop supporting that company. Like he doesn't want them to have any business. He took their popular plugin away from them, right? The plugins are all hosted on WordPress.org and said, we own that now, our plugin. Sorry. He also, when you log into WordPress.com, there's a checkbox that he added. And the checkbox says, I affirm that I am not affiliated with WP Engine. So you can't log into WordPress.com if you're affiliated with this other company. People got so like dismayed and weirded out by all of this behavior because it got really aggressive, right? That there's all this controversy. People started leaving his company. And so he actually offered $30,000 or 6 months of pay, whichever is higher. If you don't support his fight with WP Engine, leave my company.
This guy, I think, needs some mushrooms, maybe.
And I think he's got them already, right? I mean, that's why. That's got to be why. It doesn't make a lot of sense. Although there were 150 employees that left his company with this offer.
Yeah, this is, I don't know. I guess, the fact that you have a rival, which is sort of piggybacking on your success, might make you want to curtail them somehow. But the level of it and the multiple steps that he's taken and the public statements that he make all seem a little bit over the top.
Doesn't look very good, does it? I'll tell you my favorite troll thing that they did. Favorite not because I support it, but because I think it's just kind of just so trollish. It's so funny. They put a list. They published a list on their website, Automatic, of WP Engine customers, showing how many have left since they started criticizing them. So they have like this counter of like WP Engine customers who have left that company. That's pretty funny.
Yeah, seems a little petty, maybe, but
a little petty. Yeah. So he's not looking very good in this, but I mean, it's easy to describe the behavior. It's like, well, I went to this thing in the Canadian Rockies. I took a bunch of mushrooms. I thought outside the box, and now here we are.
Yeah. Maybe you should get back in the box for a while.
Get back in the box. All right, Mike, what do you got for me?
So I hate to keep amping Google, but
that's right. Like half of our news is Google news this week, huh? That's a little scary. I didn't even realize that pattern.
Yeah, I suppose this one's technically DeepMind, which is part of Google, but not Google proper, maybe. But anyway, this story kind of surprised me. The gist of it is that DeepMind developed this weather forecasting tool that just uses generative AI. So there's no physics in it, from what I understand. It's not a climate model which is trying to literally model the atmosphere or anything. It's just an AI tool called GenCast, and according to their results, it actually outperforms state of the art models for 15-day forecasts. I guess it isn't super surprising since, the progression of weather is just another sequential thing that you should be able to predict the next outcomes. But I guess there's so much work has gone into forecasting models and climate models and so forth that it was kind of a little bit shocking to me that they were getting better results with a purely Gen AI approach.
Yeah, I find that surprising too. Now, when you say Gen AI, this isn't like Transformers. It's not like I just immediately think of LLMs. It's like this isn't language based, obviously.
No, but I mean, if you think of things like, the diffusion models and people have started to use Gen AI, even transformer style models to do time series forecasting. So you can sort of think of weather as just being sort of a very sophisticated version of time series forecasting. So it's not too surprising, but yeah, it's. I
But
did not read the details of the model, but it does appear to be something which is, purely based on prior weather data rather than any sort of climate model.
no, I was surprised by this too, though, because I just thought of weather as like a chaotic system. You know, the butterfly flaps its wings in Kansas and you get the hurricanes in the Philippines. How in the world are you going to get something that can predict that as time series data?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's why this, like all climate models, does have a somewhat limited horizon.
Mm.
They're talking about up to 15 days, which is pretty good. Um, but obviously, this is not going to predict the weather a year from now.
Yeah.
Uh,
So let me just read a couple passages from this announcement. The team at DeepMind trained GenCast, that's the name of the model, on archival weather data collected between 1979 and 2018. Those are my favorite years for weather, Mike. This included temperature, wind speed, and air pressure readings from around the globe. Based on this, the model was able to learn global weather patterns. It is surprising. I find that surprising.
yeah, I'm hoping that maybe they will refine this to the point where they can tell me if my neighborhood's going to burst into flame, because that does that does happen every 10 years or so. So
I like the back testing that was described in this piece. The model was asked to generate a forecast for 2019, it says, with 1,320 combinations of variables and lead times. GenCast was accurate more than ENS, that's the model they benchmarked against, 97.2% of the time. For forecasts more than 36 hours in advance, that increased to 99.8%. That accuracy also applied to the prediction of extreme weather events such as tropical cyclones and Mike's neighborhood bursting into flames. Amazing that they put that in there, Mike.
that's great. Yeah.
So, but there's a part in here that confused me. It says GenCast won't put meteorologists out of work. The model's only as reliable as the data it's trained on. And in a changing climate, past weather patterns may not prove a reliable basis for forecasting far into the future. There are also a number of atmospheric variables which GenCast can't account for, meaning manual equations will still be required to arrive at a dependable prediction. I was scratching my head, kind of like, what? You mean they need like a gravitational constant in there? What are they even talking about here?
Yeah, I don't get this. I don't know specifically what that second sentence is referring to. I mean, the first part sort of makes sense, if the you can only predict things that are predictable, so if you're basing your model on historical data, then if the future does not reflect that historical data, then it's going to become harder and harder to forecast. But
Hmm.
the second part, I don't know what they mean by atmospheric variables. I
The
guess
ether,
there's,
calculate the weight of the resistance of the ether.
well, do they literally mean variables like stuff in equations, or do they mean stuff like, the jet stream moving, which happens from time to time?
Oh,
Or,
okay. So, Mike, here's a story for you. Gemini 2.0, that was announced by Google this week. It's their new AI model for the agentic era. Sidebar, how are we feeling about the adjective agentic? I'm not loving it myself.
I hate it.
I don't like it. I don't have a good alternative though, and it just feels wrong to me. So I was looking for the etymology of this word agentic. I was like, how old is this word? It can't be that old, right? I actually stumbled upon this op-ed in Spectator. And so, in an ironic twist, did you know the first appearance of the word agentic is from the Stanley Milgram experiment?
I did not know that, nor did I know what the Stanley Milgram experiment was.
Oh, you never heard of the Stan? Okay, so this is from the op-ed in the Spectator. It's an interesting and unusual word, agentic. For a start, some language enthusiasts, people like you and I, Mike, we dislike it as a mulish crossbreed of Latin and Greek. And I was like, oh, okay, that must be why I hate it.
Yeah, that was immediately what occurred to me too. So this combination of Latin and Greek is just unacceptable.
Also, its etymology is obscure, this Spectator piece continues. Now, this is an op ed from a Spectator by a guy named Sean Thomas. So it's not an article, it's an opinion piece. It appears to derive from 20th century psychology. One of its first usages can be found in a study of the infamous 1960s Milgram experiments at Yale University, where volunteers were persuaded to electrocute with increasing and horrible severity innocent, quote, learners who were actually actors. I studied this. It was poli sci class and maybe a psychology class. It's very, very, very famous and talked about all over the
Yeah,
place.
I've seen stuff about the experiment. I just did not know the name of it was Stanley Milgram.
Yeah. The
So,
experiment revealed that most of us would administer a lethal shock of electricity to an innocent human being if only told to do so by a man in a white coat with a clipboard. This is where the word agentic comes from.
well, that's another good reason to hate it, right?
So that's why I didn't like it. I'm going to give you one more paragraph from the Spectator op ed, and then we're going to go back to the Google announcement. So this Spectator op-ed is talking about what does agentic mean. All right, so the piece says we have an example already of how an agentic AI can roil the world in the form of Goatius maximus. I had never heard of this, Mike.
Nor had I.
What follows may feel like it is written in drunken Klingon, but here is the gist of this tale as much as anyone understands it. And footnote there, you are forgiven for not understanding it. In advance. Goatius Maximus is a meme coin, a kind of cryptocurrency underpinned only by internet subculture in jokes. The idea for this particular meme coin was invented by two AI models talking and joking with each other. The joke was released to the world by one of them, incarnated as an account on Twitter, and a human follower actually created the cryptocurrency. The agentic AI was lent $50,000 by an American software engineer and decided to buy up a load of these coins. It's now the first AI millionaire that we know of. As I write this, quote, joke cryptocurrency has a market value of $750 million.
Uh, yeah, glitch in the matrix. I'm telling you.
This is not winning us over with this word, agentic. So this is the reality we have dreamed up by our C-suite execs who spent a lot of time taking drugs. This is what we get. Here's from the Google announcement. Over the last year, we have been investing in developing more agentic models, meaning they can understand more about the world around you, think multiple steps ahead, and take action on your behalf with your supervision. Now, this is a Google blog post. What do you think about the language being used here? They understand more. They think multiple steps ahead. They take action on your behalf with your supervision. How does this make you feel, Mike?
So I think what the impression that I get in here is that they're trying to convey the idea that this really has to, for one, that it's doing things on your behalf, meaning that it's doing things that you are requesting rather than just sort of randomly trying stuff. And also they have this thing in here about with your supervision. So I think they're trying to emphasize the idea, which may or may not be true, that these things are not going to do crazy shit that you did not anticipate, which may, I hope that's the case, but obviously this is a step that makes me a little bit nervous.
Well, they're kind of begging the question a little bit too, right? The sell here for the company side of AI, the marketing pitch is, oh, it really is artificial intelligence. I mean, listen to the verbs. They can understand, they can think multiple steps ahead, they can take action. Take action, I have the least amount of trouble with, right? Because I write programs that take action without me all the time. It's the thinking and understanding part that I'm really kind of wary about here.
Yeah, that's true as well. I think they do hedge a little bit in the, they so they don't say that it can understand. They say it can understand more about the world around you.
So what
Um,
they understood before was 0.0001% of the world around me. Now they understand 0.0002 of the world around me.
yeah, they don't quantify it. Um, but yeah, I mean, the tricky thing about this sort of technology is that there's two possibilities. One is that this is overhyped and is really not going to be as useful as that they want it to be, or it really does work and it has the potential to do things that you don't want it to do. And so there's of all the possible outcomes, there's at least two bad ones.
So I have a disclosure here. We actually have been using Gemini at my work. They have a published Python package that we've been using for 6 months. It's probably been out for 9 months. And we learned last week it's already deprecated. Thank you, Google. They have a new library that is fresh off the Python printing press, also in Python. And their GitHub repo for it says, don't use this in production yet. It's not ready. But there's a type in the code base. The type is called part, and you can send into your prompt for Gemini. You can send like raw binary data, and here's where it gets pretty crazy. It's like you could just be like, is this a video? Is it a PDF? Who knows? Send it to Google. It's a grab bag. They'll tell me what it is. They'll look into it. If it's a video, it'll watch it. If it's an audio recording, it'll listen to it. If it's a PDF, it'll read it. It'll find out all the arcana in there. I don't have the time to read it myself. If you look at this data structure, it's got attributes for video metadata, file data. It's got an attribute for like, is this executing code or reading the result of a code? It looks like a bizarre future is encoded in here.
I watched a video. I think it was specifically on a subsection of this announcement called Project Mariner, and it was fairly impressive, but it did make some mistakes. So the idea was that there's these sort of chat your data
Yeah.
applications that people have been building,
You put
and
all your data in a giant search thing, and then you let the LLM search it to look for answers to your questions.
right, and so since this Gemini thing is multimodal, meaning that it handles not just text but also audio and video. The guy on the AI Explain channel was literally chatting his data, meaning that he was speaking to an AI agent, and it was synthesizing its voice back to him, and he was asking it questions about a document, and in particular, it was a document that where this person has his own LLM benchmark that he applies to new models that come out, and so he was asking this agent to tell him, where does this certain new model rank in this benchmark, and it was very impressive what the agent could do, but it also got the rank incorrect.
Hmm.
So he asked it like, what is the best model, and it said something, and it said, okay, well, you see that's number 7 on the list, right? Do you still think it's the best thing? Um, so
How much
I,
about the world did that thing understand?
yeah, I think it got some ways to go yet, but
I feel like I have limited imagination. I look at this stuff and I think, oh, great. I could go to the AI agent, hey, search for the best pizza place in my neighborhood and order me a pizza and have it delivered to my house. That's like a pretty low imagination usage of this tool.
um, but yes, I also want pizza now. So
I mean, these are the fundamental concerns of someone who hasn't taken a lot of mushrooms and LSD. I just need to figure out how to get some food for lunch. I don't I don't need to go that far out of the box.
so if they bring the pizza, but they actually have 2 pizzas, would you exchange your pizza for the other pizza?
Oh, that's a good question. Actually, here's what I want the AI agent to do. I want you to figure out how to get me free pizza by betting on a cryptocurrency market. Get me a free pizza.
There's got to be a Bitcoin pizza joke in there somewhere, but I can't conjure it up. So
Yeah, Bitcoin pizza. Okay. I also talked to a rep at Microsoft this week. He mentioned a new framework they're rolling out on Azure. This is a scoop. The first picture me coding scoop ever. They have not announced this yet. And I'm scooping them right here.
and you didn't
They,
sign an NDA or anything, right?
maybe. Geez, I don't know. Well, this is a scoop. It's buried an hour into our episode here. Buried on a niche podcast. So they announced this thing that they have the AI agent service, and they rebranded their AI thing, which used to be called Azure AI Studio. It's now called Azure AI Foundry. That was announced, but they're going to like embed all of this agent stuff. They're going to bake it into this AI Foundry. So you can just go into their portal and like click a bunch of junk and be like, yes, get me the pizza, invent a new cryptocurrency, predict the weather in my area, and bet on the stock market. Like, do all that in the next hour. I'm going to go make some coffee.
Sounds good.
You heard it here for her first, folks.
I haven't quite reached that point in my AI usage yet, although I did get Copilot to generate some HTML for me this week. So
It's almost, that's agentic. Is that agentic? Ooh, yeah, it makes me feel dirty using this word, Mike. Agentic. I don't like the word.
yeah, we really need to think up something better so that we can start popularizing it, because I hate this word.
All right. Last three articles we have are all in the category of, this is a lightning round, Mike. Are they high or are they trying to become a nation state? This is lightning round. So one was from a site called Tom's Hardware. AI GPU clusters with 1 million GPUs planned for 2027. This is a Broadcom announcement. Broadcom, if you remember, bought VMware. They are a chip maker, and they have these customers who are quote unquote hyperscalers, meaning they have bonkers numbers of machines. And this goes along with Elon Musk saying we're going to build this AI supercomputer with 10,000 GPUs to 1 million GPUs. And Broadcom's like, oh, yeah? Yeah? We're going to do that for 3 people. Okay.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with high on this one.
Hi. You remember the exhibit meme? We heard you like bikes, so we put a bike in your bike so you can bike while you're biking.
My first thought when I heard this is, do you remember the days like 5 years ago when people were concerned about Bitcoin mining sucking up all of the electricity?
Yeah. Now it's me trying to order pizza and have an AI generate new Bitcoins called Goatsius Maximus.
I guess that takes us to the next story, though.
Yeah, fire it up for me. Lightning round.
So, because all of these new AI models require so much energy, and the mega companies are building lots of data centers in general, they need a lot of power. And one of the things that they are doing is investing in nuclear energy. And in particular, it seems like they're putting a lot of money into something called small modular reactors, which don't generally exist in on a commercial scale yet, but seem to be like the wave of the future. One thing, this was a story out of maybe a month or two ago now, but Microsoft in particular has this deal with a company called Constellation Energy to restart part of 3 Mile Island. Now, if you're not an ancient person such as me, the words 3 Mile Island may not resonate with you in the same way. But for people of my generation, the words 3 Mile Island are sort of synonymous with world-ending nuclear accident.
Yeah, that's we have Chernobyl at home.
yeah, it's our version of Chernobyl. Yeah, so 3 Mile Island was a site of a famous core meltdown. The effects of it in terms of health and stuff like that were fortunately fairly minimized, but it was an extremely scary incident which had a large effect on ending the run of large-scale nuclear facilities in the United States.
People didn't want to do it after that, right? Too dangerous, too scary. There was a really good PBS piece about it. I can't remember the name of that. A documentary that I watched years ago about 3 Mile Island. I was pretty surprised by the story. It's a dramatic story.
So I don't think this was prompted by drug use.
Yeah, this to me seems like a perfectly rational decision if you run a company like Microsoft and you're thinking to yourself, you know what? We really are a nation state. Let's generate
Yeah.
let's generate our own power. We will print our own currency. Rational decisions, Mike.
Yeah, I mean, I think Meta's been on this road for a while too, where, I remember Meta sort of setting up their own microgrids for their data centers so that they could be independent of the normal electrical grid.
Mm-hmm.
There's an aspect of this that I haven't found any data on, but I suspect this is probably very exciting to companies that are in the nuclear industry and have been in this sort of long winter of standard nuclear fission plants being shuttered.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it's probably
Not
very
enough customers. Yeah.
yeah. So it's probably pretty exciting to companies that want to build nuclear reactors and haven't been able to for a while.
It is pretty nutty to imagine Microsoft like, yeah, we'll just buy 3 Mile Island and start that thing back up. That's pretty crazy, actually. That is like a what world are we living in story.
Yeah. Gotta do something to power those Cybertrucks.
All right, last one for you, lightning round. This one comes from a blog titled Subsea Cables and Internet Infrastructure. And sidebar, do you think they have a podcast? It sounds a little bit more niche than our podcast.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, it seems like there's probably like a podcast where they talk about the sea shanties that they like, and then they go on to talk about cables.
That's pretty funny. Here's from the Post. Several sources have whispered in my ear that Meta is now planning a new 16 fiber pair cable that will encompass the world, going from the U.S. East Coast to the U.S. West Coast via the Atlantic, Indian Ocean, and the Pacific, the most ambitious subsea project ever undertaken. They're going to build a giant internet cable around the entire world. Okay, lightning round. Are they high or are they a nation state?
This is one of those stories that I think divides the world into two types of people. So there are people who have read Cryptonomicon and people who haven't read Cryptonomicon. And the first class of people are like, oh, yeah, that makes sense to me. And then the second class of people are, holy shit, our communication infrastructure relies on cables under the ocean? What the fuck is up with that?
But wait a minute. You're telling me that Facebook, the company that will surreptitiously turn on the microphone on your phone to listen to you so that they can better advertise to you, the company that their whole product is how can we invasively spy on every quadrant of your life, every sector of your life, they're now going to build a giant subsea cable and my data is going to go over that subsea cable? Is that better or worse than my government or a coalition of governments owning that cable? To me, sounds a little worse, actually. Sounds scarier. I don't want those drugged up CEOs running my data on their cables, okay?
I do not know to what extent this is like a critical thing. So, is there going to be a point in the future where if I don't have access to this giant undersea cable, I'm not going to be able to communicate as effectively as I would if I did have access to it?
That's a great point. So you got to sign on with your Xbox or your Facebook account before you can actually ride the information superhighway?
Yeah, that would be a bummer if I had to have a OAuth token from Facebook to be able to send data over this cable or something. But nation state is my possibly a little bit of ayahuasca, but also nation state.
Here's the thing I love about that sentence. Out of context, it makes absolutely no sense.
That's what I was going for.
Yeah, we got a little bit of originality on the show today where Mike said the phrase, possibly a little bit of ayahuasca, but also nation state. There is no other podcast in the world where you will hear this words uttered. So Thanks for coming along the journey with us, listeners. We hope you're enjoying the show. Please, please, we encourage you, reach out to us, podcast at picturemecoding.com. Let us know what you think of the show. We really honestly want to know. Tell us which episodes you liked. You can also rate and review the show, but, we're not here flogging that. We really just want to hear from you. We want to know what you think. What did we do well? What did we suck at? What are you looking forward to in the new year? Mike, I've been enjoying podcasting with you. I've been having a good time.
It's been a fun year. I look forward to season 3.
Me too. So we're going to take a few weeks off here, and we will be back in 2025. This has been Picture Me Coding with Eric Aker and Mike Mull. Thanks so much. Thank you, Mike.
See you next year.
Bye-bye.